I would like to point out that these proceedings will also be broadcast on the Chamber of Deputies Web TV channel. I would like to remind you that remote participation is permitted for colleagues in accordance with the procedures established by the Committee on the Rules of Proceedings. Today's agenda includes the informal hearing of Masashi Ieshima, a representative of the Japanese Confederation of A and H bomb sufferers organizations, Nihon Hidankyo, Nobel Peace Prize for 2024, as well as Florian Eblenkamp, who is the Advocacy Officer of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, who was also awarded Nobel Peace Prize for 2017. On behalf of the members of the committee, I would also like to welcome and thank Mr. Masashi Ieshima and Mr. Florian Eblenkamp for their willingness to take part in our work. They are accompanied by Alessia Trama, Head of External Relations for the Senza Atomica project of the Be the Hope ETS Foundation, as well as Francesco Vignaca, the campaign coordinator for the Italian Peace and Disarmament Network we've been working with for a very long time now. I would also like to remind you that Nihon Hidankyo brings together the survivors of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the so-called Ibakusha. It was founded in 1956, and it works for nuclear disarmament, the protection of the survivors' rights, as well as education and awareness raising on the consequences of the atomic weapons through the testimonies of its members. For its efforts to achieve a world free of nuclear weapons, and for demonstrating through testimonies that nuclear weapons must never be used again. And for this, the organization was awarded the 2024 Nobel Peace Prize. I personally met some of the Bakusha during my trips to Hiroshima. The last was in April 2023 within the framework of the Forum of G7 parliamentarians on the elimination of nuclear weapons promoted by the ICAN campaign. I spoke with women and men who still bear the wounds of those harrowing bombs upon their bodies. They were relentless in telling the stories of those days and the aftermath of those days. The international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons is a campaign to mobilize civil society worldwide with the goal of prohibiting and eliminating nuclear weapons. In 2017, the campaign was also awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for promoting the signing at the United Nations of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. This entered into force on January 22nd, 2021, and it is binding on all signatory countries, 95 to date. Italy is not among the signatory countries of the treaty. Against this backdrop, I would like to point out to our guests that on July the 12th, 2023, as some of you may already know, the Foreign Affairs Committee unanimously approved a resolution, which I was the first to sign, committing the government, among other things, to continue to evaluate, in accordance with the obligations entered into within the Atlantic Alliance and with the with the steering of other allies too, possible actions to move closer to some of the contents of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, in particular with regard assistance to victims and environmental restoration, as enshrined in Article 6 of the treaty. Today's hearing is therefore a good opportunity to rekindle the debate on Italy's reapproaching to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons with a view to its future signature. Today also marks an occasion to examine the humanitarian impact of nuclear arsenals and the international situation of disarmament regimes, in particular in view of the expiry of the New START Treaty, which is scheduled for February next year. We live in a difficult time. Therefore, today's hearing is all the more timely, and I'm therefore very happy to give the floor to Mr. Masashi Ieshima to deliver his speech. Mr. Ieshima, the floor is yours.
受賞してから1年が経過します。ノーベル委員会は受賞理由として広島と長崎の原爆生存者、被爆者による草の根運動に取り組んできた日本被団協は核兵器のない世界の実現を目指して尽力し、核兵器が
The translation will be provided in consecutive mode. It is okay.
核兵器が二度と使われてはならないことを
Tra le motivazioni dietro l'assegnazione del premio, il Comitato per il Nobel ha sottolineato il lavoro
The survivors to the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and their efforts to achieve a world without nuclear weapons and to demonstrate that such weapons must never be used again.
原爆が投下されたその年だけでも広島、長崎で21万人もの人が亡くなり、
Solo nell'anno in cui furono sganciate le bombe.
In the year when the bombings were dropped, many people died.
1万人以上の人が旅立ち、残る被爆者は10万人を切りました。あと10年もすれば被爆者はほとんどいなくなってしまうでしょう。日本被団協がノーベル賞を受賞されたということは、核兵器使用がどういう結末をもたらすかを再認識させるという世界の為政者への警告でしょう。被団協の代表たちのノーベル委員会との懇談の場でもちらっと漏らされた本音です。
Da quel giorno
Since that day, many more died because of radiations or other factors linked to the exposition to radiations. So there were less than 100,000 survivors. In 10 years, probably there will be no survivor to atomic bombings. The award of the Nobel Peace Prize to the Hidankyo Association is a reminder for world leaders so that they remember that there can be no more nuclear weapons in the future. This is what the representatives of the association said during their short meeting with the Nobel Peace Prize Committee.
7月7日に122カ国の賛成により国連でされた核兵器禁止条約は2021年1月に発効するに至り、現在95カ国が署名し、74カ国が批准しています。私たち被爆者にとっての長年の悲願である核兵器廃絶への道が開けたものと喜んでおりますが、これが核兵器廃絶への大きな前進であるとしても、肝心な核兵器保有国が動かなければ解決への道は開けません。
The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was adopted by the United Nations on July 7th, 2017, with the support of 122 countries, and it entered into force on January 22nd, 2021. It was signed by 95 countries and ratified by 74 countries, and we survivors are very happy that these will lead the way to the abolition of nuclear weapons. This is an important leap forward, but we will have to have all countries on board because the countries having nuclear weapons must act.
広島に原爆が投下された当時、私は3歳1ヶ月であり、 隣の子供とセミ取りをしたことなど、ほんの断片的な夢のような記憶しかありません。自宅は広島市の北部、内田町という爆心地から 1.8 キロの地点にありました。家の倒壊は免れましたが、爆風で家中のガラスが吹き飛び、屋根がめくれて月が見える状態だったと聞きます。
Vorrei
I would now like to share with you my personal experience of the atomic bombing in Hiroshima. When the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, I was 3 years and 1 month old, so I only have vague and fragmented memories, such as catching cicadas with my neighbor's son. My house was in Ushida-cho in the northern part of the Hiroshima city, 1.8 kilometers from the hypocenter, and it was not destroyed by the explosion, thanks God. However, I was told that all the windows were blown out and that the roof was blown off, making it possible to see the moon through it.
10日の朝、朝食後、私は家の玄関の土間で遊んでいたそうです。おそらく爆風で吹き飛ばされたのでしょうが、奇跡的に無事でした。母親は玄関脇の日当たりの良い部屋にいたそうですが、爆風で飛び散った窓ガラスの破片が体中に突き刺さったそうです。近所にお住まいの看護婦さんに手当てをしてもらったといいます。妹はまだ10ヶ月の赤ん坊でしたが、その日は布団袋の陰に寝かされていたため無事でした。父親は爆心から 1.4 キロの広島逓信局の屋上で空襲警戒の夜景当番を終えて帰宅し、2階で仮眠中でした。閃光に驚いて起き上がり、階下まで吹き飛ばされたものの無事でした。
Secondo quanto mi è
I was told that on the morning of the bombing, I was playing in the yard in front of our house. After we had eaten breakfast, I was swept away by the shockwave, but miraculously I was unarmed. My mother was in a sunny room next to the entrance and was pierced all over her body by thousands of pieces of glass that had flown out of the windows. She was then treated by a nurse who lived nearby. My younger sister was only 10 months old, but she was protected by the futon she had been placed under. My father, on the other hand, had just returned home from his night shift at the Hiroshima Post and Communication Office, 1.4 kilometers from the hypercenter. And to protect himself from air raids, he was taking a nap on the second floor when he was awakened by a flash of light and thrown to the floor below. But fortunately, he too was unharmed.
15年間草木も生えないと噂され、その土地の秋、私たちは祖父母のいる鳥取県に仕事のある父親を残して移住しました。私は混雑する満員電車の窓から押し込まれたそうです。姉が2人いましたが、すでに食料事情の悪い広島から鳥取県に疎開して、祖父のものを元から学校に通ってました。何しろ配給されるおかゆというのは、丼一杯にご飯粒が2つ3つ浮かんでいるだけという代物だったそうですから。
It was said that no trees or grass would grow in Hiroshima for 75 years. So, in the fall of that year, my family separated from my father, who worked there, and moved to the Tottori prefecture, where my grandparents lived. I was told that during the journey, I was pushed out of the window of the crowded train. I had 2 older sisters who had already been evacuated to Tottori prefecture under the care of my grandparents, and they were attending school there as food was scarce in Hiroshima. In fact, what was distributed was nothing more than a bowl of porridge with only 2 or 3 grains of rice floating in it.
転勤希望が叶って鳥取県に移住したのですが、被爆から24年を経て、上顎がんにより59歳という若さで亡くなりました。それは明らかに被爆の影響でしょう。私自身、被爆から72年を経過して甲状腺がんを患いました。こんな晩年に被爆の影響が出るとは思いもよりませんでした。
The following following year, my father's request for a job transfer was accepted, and he also moved to the Tottori Prefecture. However, 24 years after the bombing, he died prematurely at 59 from jaw cancer. This was clearly a consequence of radiation exposure. I myself developed a thyroid cancer 72 years after the bombing, and I never imagined that the effects of radiation would affect me so late in life.
高等化したアメリカは原爆被害を徹底的に隠蔽し、日本政府もそれに追随して被爆者に対して一切の救援の手を差し伸べませんでした。そんな中で1954年のビキニ環礁でのアメリカの水爆実験によるマグロ汚染被害により、国民の核実験反対運動が高まり、1956年の第2回原水禁世界大会長崎の地で日本被団協が結成され、本格的な被爆者運動が始まりました。
Dopo la guerra,
After the war, the United States carefully concealed the damage caused by the atomic bombs they had dropped, and the Japanese government did the same, offering no help whatsoever to the survivors of the two bombings. However, in 1954, the American hydrogen bomb test in Bikini Atoll caused the contamination of tuna and sparked a national movement against nuclear testing. After the Second World Conference against H-bombs and atomic bombs in 1956, the Japanese Confederation of A and H-bomb sufferers organizations was founded, the Nihon Hidankyo. A large-scale movement of atomic bomb survivors was born.
挨拶に次のように述べられています。手をつないで決戦と立ち上がるために他なりませんでした。世界に訴うべきは訴え、国家に求むべきは求め、自ら立ち上がり、互いに愛救う道を講ずるためでありました。かくて私たちは自らを救うとともに、私たちの体験を通して人類の危機を救おうという決意で誓い合ったのです。私たちは今日ここに声を合わせて高らかに世界に訴えます。人類は私たちの犠牲と苦難を再び繰り返してはなりません。
la dichiarazione
The declaration of Hidankyo's first conference, Greetings to the World, states, "We had no choice but to join forces and take a firm stand. We asked the world what we needed. We asked our nations what we wanted, and we took a stand and we took the necessary measures to save each other. This is how not only did we save ourselves, but through our experience we also made clear our determination to save humanity from this crisis. Let us unite our voices today and make a strong appeal to the whole world. Humanity must never repeat our sacrifices and suffering."
核兵器廃絶は国連創設時からの大きな目標であります。東西の冷戦と米ロの核軍拡競争や NPT 体制を無視した国々による核兵器開発などもあって、条約に謳われた核兵器軍縮協議は進んでおりません。
l'abolizione
The abolition of nuclear weapons has been one of the main goals of the United Nations since its founding. However, due to the Cold War between East and West, the nuclear arms race between the US and Russia, and the development of nuclear weapons by countries that ignore the Non-Proliferation Treaty, no progress has been made on nuclear disarmament as enshrined in the treaty.
各国として核兵器廃絶に向けて世界の世論をリードすることを期待されている日本政府は、耳に心地よい核兵器禁止に向けて世界の世論をリードするという言葉を発するばかりでなく、核兵器廃絶を世界に訴える真剣な取り組みをしてほしいと思います。来年には次の NPT 再検討会議が開催されます。また、新たな核兵器禁止条約の再検討会議も開催されるのです。世界市民の声による後押しにより、国連の場を通じて、さらに核兵器廃絶への道筋を示す議論が深められることを切に願います。ご清聴ありがとうございました。
essendo
As the the only country to have suffered atomic bombings during a war, the Japanese government is expected to lead global public action toward abolition. And I hope it will not just utter the pleasant-sounding phrase, lead global public opinion toward the prohibition of nuclear weapons, but that it will seriously commit itself to appealing to the world to achieve this goal. In 2026, the next review conference of the Non-Proliferation Treaty and then a new conference of state parties to the Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons will be held. And we hope that United Nations can lead the way, pointing the way toward the abolition of nuclear weapons. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you so very much, Mr. Ieshima, for telling us your personal story. Thank you for sharing it with us. And we take note of your appeal. Let me tell you from the outset that this committee will be debating, and I hope will unanimously approve a resolution that I was the first one to sign. We're still working on it. As I said, a resolution on the matter, and I hope I will be in a position to give you good news on the approval of this resolution. I will now give the floor to Mr. Florian Eblenkamp for his speech. You have the floor, Mr. Eblenkamp.
Grazie per avermi invitato a parlare oggi al Parlamento italiano. Continuerò in inglese perché il mio italiano non è abbastanza buono per rendere le sfumature che questo argomento richiede. Un po'. Madam Chair, distinguished members of the Commission, dear colleagues, thank you sincerely for inviting me to speak today on behalf of the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons. It's an honor to be here today with Ieshima-san, a representative of Nihon Hidankyo, the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Your description of one single, comparatively small nuclear weapon reminds us that nuclear weapons are not an abstract concept, but a lived human tragedy. Dear members of parliament, we meet today at a time when nuclear weapons have once again moved to the center of world politics. Every alarming development of recent years, new deployments, modernization programs, open nuclear threats, has been justified by one phrase: nuclear deterrence. Russia threatens to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine and calls that deterrence. The United States and its allies modernize their arsenals also in the name of deterrence. China, North Korea, and others expand their capabilities again for deterrence. An Israeli minister has spoken about using a nuclear weapon in Gaza to deter Hamas. And yes, Italy too, as part of NATO, subscribes to and thereby legitimizes this ideology. But when we look closely, we see that many of these actions are not deterrence at all. They are nuclear blackmail. The deliberate use of nuclear threats to intimidate and to silence others, to facilitate violations of international law and of the most basic norms of state behavior. 80 years after Ieshima-san experienced the nuclear bombing in Hiroshima, we find ourselves once again standing at the nuclear brink. But nuclear weapons are not a force of nature. They are ultimately a political choice. So I'm asking you, do we continue to respond to every new threat with even more deterrence, even more nuclear weapons? Or are we ready to begin a serious, honest conversation about potential alternatives and about the human, the environmental, and the moral consequences of clinging on to a doctrine that will one day destroy us all? In 2025, the risk of nuclear weapons being used intentionally or by accident is higher than at any time since the Cold War. Nuclear sharing arrangements are being renewed and modernized here in Europe, including on Italian soil. Thousands of weapons remain on high alert, ready to launch with minutes, some of them pointed directly at us here in Rome. And we are told that this is security, but can something that would annihilate entire cities truly make us safe? The humanitarian consequences of any nuclear detonation are beyond imagination. Mass death, radiation, famine, and climate disruption. And even a limited nuclear war would lead to a global food shortage and affect billions of people. That is why nuclear weapons are not only a question for military strategists. They are ultimately also a human rights issue, threatening the most fundamental rights of all, the right to life, to health, and to a safe environment, to name a few. In this context, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, or TPNW, represents a turning point. Adopted at the United Nations in 2017, it entered into force in 2021, and since only a few days ago, a majority of the world's countries has either signed or ratified the treaty. The central message of the treaty is simple. Weapons that cause catastrophic humanitarian harm must be prohibited, just as we have done with chemical weapons, with landmines, and with cluster munition. The TPNW is not directed against any specific country or alliance of countries. It is directed against the weapons themselves and against the outdated belief that security can be built on mass destruction. The treaty complements rather than competes with the Non-Proliferation Treaty. The NPT prevents proliferation, and the TPNW gives meaning to the NPT's promise for nuclear disarmament. And crucially, the TPNW contains provisions on assistance to victims and environmental remediation. For the first time, international law recognizes the suffering of nuclear victims from Hiroshima to test sites in Kazakhstan, on Pacific Islands, and beyond. This should be a matter of our shared human responsibility. It is what we call nuclear justice, not only in preventing future harm, but also to address the legacy of past harm. Some have called the TPNW controversial. In truth, I think it's one of the most profoundly humanitarian initiatives of our time. It stems from the same moral impulse that gave us the Geneva Conventions, the basis of international law, which stem from the belief that even in matters of war and peace, humanity must have limits. As Henri Dunant, the founder of the Red Cross, once said, it is not enough to feel compassion. We must act. And I'm sure many of you feel compassion with Ieshima-san, so now it is time to act. Italy has a proud tradition of promoting human rights, humanitarian law, and international dialogue. This very parliament and its committee have repeatedly shown concern for the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons, and I'm therefore very encouraged that the Foreign Affairs Committee will again soon debate a resolution calling on the government to engage constructively with the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. This is a crucial step and a sign that Italy no longer wishes to ignore the TPNW, but to contribute to this growing international conversation. Of course, Italy is part of NATO, and its security policy is complex. But engagement with the TPNW does not mean breaking an alliance. Several NATO countries, Norway, Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, Finland, and Sweden, have already attended TPNW meetings as observers. They have shown that dialogue is possible, even if the legal conclusions remain different. With the majority of the world's countries already being part of the TPNW, Italy now can and should join the conversation and no longer pretend to ignore that the reality of the treaty is growing and growing. 2026 will be a decisive year for the future of international law related to nuclear weapons. It will see the review conference of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, a treaty that is nearly universal, but unfortunately paralyzed by political division. And it will also see the first review conference of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, a treaty that is growing, that is inclusive, and that is focused on humanitarian solutions. So the world will watch to see which countries are willing to engage. And I would encourage Italy to be present, at least as an observer state, at the 2026 TPNW Review Conference. Even without joining the treaty at the moment, Italy's participation would send a powerful message that it is ready to listen, ready for dialogue, and ready to lead with human rights and reason. Distinguished members of parliament, when we talk about nuclear weapons, we often speak about deterrence, about balance and strategy and stability. But the survivors from Hiroshima and Nagasaki remind us that behind every strategic concept stand human lives. Mothers, children, entire communities erased in a flash. And their message to us is simple and timeless: never again. Engaging with the TPNW is therefore not an act of protest. It is an act of respect for life. It is a reaffirmation of Italy's commitment to humanitarian law and for human dignity. It is a step toward a world where our security is measured not so much by our capacity to destroy, but by our capacity to protect. Madam Chair, distinguished members, we stand at a crossroads. We can continue to rely on nuclear deterrence and simply hope for the best, or we can start to begin to imagine a safer, fairer alternative. It is up to you all, as members of this Parliament, to make Italy choose the path of humanity, of dialogue, and of courage, and to help shape the global effort to finally abolish the most inhumane weapon ever created. Thank you.
Molte grazie.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Eblenkamp, for your powerful speech. May I tell you, over the years, I have very much appreciated ICAN's commitment. First time I met with the activists of ICAN as a speaker of this House, they came here to raise awareness on the treaty, and it occurred to me to think they were so skilled, but they were so full of ideals that will never manage to push this treaty forward. But I was wrong. When you truly believe in a goal, then civil society can really make a quantum leap. And this is what happened. You really made a difference. Thank you for your determination. Today, we have this treaty and we must cherish, nurture it, and relaunch it. Having said that, I would like to ask my colleagues if they wish to take the floor. MP Marino, good morning, and thank you very much. I would like to welcome Masashi Ieshima and Florian Eblenkamp. First of all, I would like to thank all of you for your testimonies. Unfortunately, now, in Italy, we are living a very challenging time. Government seems to be in denial of everything, and it doesn't seem to want to face important challenges such as nuclear disarmament and membership of the treaty. We, in the past, proposed a motion in this regard, but it was not approved. But let me tell you one thing. You are true. When the civil society does something, then we manage to achieve something. And this was demonstrated by our public action on Gaza. We are here to reiterate our commitment in order for us to be able to join the treaty. You know, listening to this heartbreaking testimonies really changes everything. The spillover effects of the bombings were felt in Italy too, despite the hundreds of thousands of kilometers that separate us from the places of the bombings. I would like to thank all of you for being here, and I just wanted to reiterate that we will stand resolute in bringing forward this cause. We have to abolish nuclear weapons because otherwise they will bring the world to the brink of destruction. Unfortunately, current governments do not understand how important it is to push nuclear disarmament forward. Thank you, MP Marino. MP Porta, you have the floor. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would also like to thank our guests, our authoritative guests, two Nobel Prize laureates who are here to remind us that memory is not only a right of humanity, and we also have to respect the victims of the past, but this goes well beyond this. We owe respect to our future generations too. Unfortunately, over the last few years, we've been witnessing a denial of this human right we are all entitled to, that is to say, to keep a memento of the tragedies of the past, the Holocaust, victims of dictatorships, and other tragedies of the past. Indeed, I believe parliaments have a duty to bring these causes forward, especially vis-à-vis newer generations, who, to me, are a beacon of hope, the only beacon of hope for the future. As MP Marino said, if there's one single beam of hope we can underline against the backdrop of the tragedies that have affected human rights and the environment, well, this is the new awareness shown by young people. As you rightly recalled, over the last few years, we've been brought closer to a renewed nuclear conflict in an unexpected way since the end of the Second World War. And this must make us even more resolute with regard to the commitments towards the TPNW treaty and other commitments. As far as Italy is concerned, I mean, after all, we are only parliamentarians, including from the opposition here today, but despite this, we must strive and make everything that we can to bring the resolution forward. And let me remind you that this resolution was approved unanimously. So as I said, we have to make sure that at least Italy can participate as an observer country to the review conference in 2026 on top of the 95 countries which have already approved and joined the treaty. As I said, I am sad to note that parliamentarians from the ruling majority are not present here today. But despite this, let me remind you that your presence here will give fresh impetus to the actions of this committee. We want to engage on multilateralism, and we want to promote a plural society, and we want to tap into international alliances, which are also under threat today as a consequence of a resurgence of authoritarian regimes today. Thank you, MP Porta. Are there? Yes, MP Quartabella would like to take the floor. Thank you. I would also like to thank Madam Chair Boldrini for organizing this hearing, and I would also like to thank Florian and the ICAN. We've known each other for a very long time now, and I would also like to thank Masashi Ieshima for his testimonies. I am back from Ukraine right now, and let me remind you that the issue of non-proliferation treaty is all the more timely, and nuclear threat is very real in a country that is facing the threat of bombings, relentless bombings for the fourth year in a row. As we speak, the country was hit by new attacks this morning, but there's also a threat of nuclear weapons hanging over Ukraine. And let us remember that there are nuclear power plants that are used as collateral threats. So for us, it is of the essence to be able to frame these campaigns within this broader picture. We live in a world where nuclear proliferation is not a thing of the past. Indeed, it is increasing and it is exacerbating. And as MP Porta rightly recalled, in a world when multilateralism is shrinking, it is all the more important to come up with a shared framework there's no use in preaching to the converters. Instead, we must appeal to those who have not yet joined this cause. We must do away with impunity, and let us remember what happened between Russia and Ukraine in terms of the threats that were moved just recently. So I believe your campaign is really pivotal. It is indeed ever difficult to bring forward because there are governments, there are stakeholders who are turning a blind eye on what is happening. There are regimes that are paving the way to impunity, and for those who believe that negotiations on non-proliferation are of no use, well, they're wrong. So I wish you all the best. On behalf of my party, let me remind you that you have our full support, and I hope you will be successful in your future endeavors. Thank you, Madam MP Quartapelle. I myself have a number of questions and considerations and points to raise. First of all, I would like to ask Mr. Ieshima the following. What kind of awareness is there in Japan in terms of Hibakusha survivors? Your membership has increased over time, or is there still some caution when it comes to raising awareness on these issues? What about the Japanese government? What is the response being given by the Japanese government to the survivors' claims? Is it willing to listen to their claims? Is it willing to make their voices heard? Or rather, is this something that is not the object of a shared consensus? Is the Japanese government willing to take the lead in this battle towards the abolition of nuclear weapons? And I also have a question for Florian Eblenkamp, which concerns the review conference next year, the review conference on the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So my question is the following. What are the prospects of this review conference? Last time, we fell short of even a common declaration. So what are the moves that are being embarked on, that you have promoted? And I mean, what is happening at the level of individual member states to promote this review conference? And lastly, I would like to remind what could be the impact of a nuclear bomb today. So what if? We know what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki 8 years ago, but no country beyond the U.S. had nuclear bombs. While today, there are 9 countries that have nuclear bombs. So, hence my question. If one of these countries managed to drop this bomb, what would be the consequences for humanity as a whole? Maybe we need to say it out loud that there are spillover effects, breaking bad effects, which must be a memento for us to push for the abolition of nuclear weapons. Thank you. And without further ado, I'll give the floor to Mr. Ieshima for the replies, and then to Mr. Eblenkamp. The floor is yours.
日本政府はアメリカとの軍事同盟が大切であるとして我々の意見に耳を貸しません。アンケートによれば国民の7割が核兵器禁止条約に入るべきと言っております。しかし ICAN が ノーベル賞を受けたときに、佐原節子さんの演説の中でおっしゃいましたけれども、国民の意見と政府の意見がこれだけ乖離した国はないとおっしゃいました。事実その通りだというふうに思いますし、日本政府は核兵器禁止条約は
Il governo giapponese apprezza molto
The Japanese government really appreciate what the US had done in the aftermath of the Second World War to rebuild the country. Of course, there are protests happening on behalf of citizens with regard to nuclear disarmament. But I must also say that the state has different plans other than citizens' plans. We cannot claim that citizens' goals and government's goals overlap. They're different. So despite the Nihon Hidankyo was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, the willingness of Japan to do away with atomic bombs is not still resolute. So our claims and our government claims are not exactly the same.
爆弾60キロの詰めたウラニウムのうち核爆発したのはわずか7グラム、ピンポン玉1個分の量と言われています。それで惨禍です。ビキニ原爆水爆実験は広島の1000倍です。一発で日本は壊滅する。こんなものが戦争で兵隊同士で使えるわけがない。地球は破滅します。
le bombe che
The bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, if compared to the bombs of government that governments have today, are nothing, are a little thing. Today's bombs are 100 times stronger than the bombs that were dropped at the time. So they are a weapon of mass destruction that will annihilate humanity as a whole. So if modern bombs were dropped today, the humanity as a whole would cease to exist.
意図にかかわらず核戦争が起こる危険があるということです。一番大きな危機はキューバ封鎖の時でした。その時潜水艦は発射指令を受けて準備していたけども、副艦長の同意がないと最終的に決断できないということで諦めた。これで核戦争を防止できた。そしていろんなシステムの障害とか、そして、ロシアが雲の輝きを衛星が核攻撃と誤認して、ただソビエトのロシアの中佐の判断でこれは間違いだとして迎撃ボタンを押さなかった。こういう事故もあるし、沖縄あるいはスコットランドでも核誤射事件がありました。そして、中村逸郎という筑波大学の教授が述べております、本に書いておりますけれども、1995年ロシアのエリツィン時代にノルウェーのオーロラ観測衛星を核攻撃と誤認して核ボタンを押した。しかしシステムが作動しなかった。こういう間違いが起こったら本当に悲劇です。
allora
It is, I believe, too easy now to tap into these weapons. It is way too easy to pull the trigger. There were cases in history testifying how close we came to atomic bombs using, such as Russia. From a submarine some time ago, the people on board of a submarine exchanged a flash in the sky for an atomic bomb dropping, and they decided to act accordingly. So at the time, one of the chiefs of the army decided to wait and see if it really was an attack. So we came closer to another dropping at the time, and the same can be said For the case of Norway. In Norway, a satellite was launched in the sky, and some countries believed that this was an atomic bomb dropping. So I am wondering, and I'm asking you here, don't you believe it has become way too easy for us to use nuclear bombs because just a bunch of people have the power to pull the trigger and to press the button? I believe such a decision-making power must be something given to a different forum based on codes. But war knows no code. Annihilation of humanity must not depend on just a bunch of people, and these bombs must be eliminated immediately. But because on two occasions in the past, we have come very close to the brink of annihilation of humanity as a whole, and this must stop.
を廃絶するしか生存の道はないという我々の信念で訴えております。
Furthermore, I would like to add that human life is the most precious thing that there is, and for me, it is unthinkable to imagine that a bomb could sweep away our life, our existence on this planet in a blink of an eye. This is why I believe that nuclear bombs must be eliminated as a matter of urgency.
Grazie.
Thank you very much. Mr. Eblenkamp, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the question and for the comments by the members of the committee. Attending the NPT conferences, I want to speak frankly, is sometimes a very schizophrenic experience. Because you wake up in the morning, you read the news about investments in nuclear weapons, about build-up in arsenals, about open nuclear threats, all in violation of the very specific legally binding commitments in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, for example, on complete nuclear disarmament. And yet, delegates at the conference would speak about the treaty as being in perfect order without any flaws and any issues. It is therefore no surprise that the last time the NPT community could agree on an outcome document was in 2010. So now we will have 16 years that a new joint statement would have to cover, which makes it all the more unlikely that such a statement would exist. The NPT also speaks to a broader crisis of multilateralism, and I'm picking up some of the comments that have been made by the members of parliament, that it ultimately rests on a system, a two-class system, where a handful of countries has the right to have nuclear weapons, and all other countries have forsworn these weapons in exchange for the guarantee for the nuclear weapon states to disarm. This has not happened. And it was one of the motivations for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons to set the same legal standard for all countries without exception and without any loopholes such as the practice of nuclear sharing, for example. So unfortunately, I don't have high hopes for the NPT review conference, which will take place in April. But my hope is even higher for the TPNW review conference at the end of the year in November, to further strengthen the standard against nuclear weapons. We expect that much more than 100 countries will attend the conference, which will be chaired by South Africa, and further advance the international norm against nuclear weapons, regardless of the geopolitical games in the NPT. I think when we prepare for these conferences, be it from our side, but even more so from the side of members of parliament, it's very important that we request the government to be very specific, to not talk about nuclear weapons only in abstract terms, but for example, about the humanitarian consequences and the catastrophe that any use would entail. I think this is the only way that we can change the conversation at these conferences, to not talk about non-proliferation only, but actually to talk about nuclear weapons. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both of you It was really eye-opening listening to your speeches, and I hope your message will get to decision makers. We as a Human Rights Committee will follow up on your requests and will table the resolution I mentioned. As I said, there's a scarce willingness on behalf of the ruling government to bring this matter forward, but we will be relentless in our endeavor. We have said, as we have seen it in the past, that despite the unanimous approval of resolutions, the government does not follow up on these unanimous decisions. So despite this, say, democracy flaws, we will stand firm on our endeavors. And I hope we will participate as observers, and I hope in the review treaty, the review conference next year, and I hope parliamentarians will participate in greater numbers. After all, we can have an impact on government's decision makers too. I wish you